I've been playing Magic since the release of Core 2015, so almost 8 years now. Over that time, I've accumulated quite a few cards and made quite a few decks, especially Commander decks. Here are all of them, all 41. There are all sorts of decks here, from cheap to expensive, powerful to casual. There's at least one of every color combination here, so let's not waste any more time and get right into looking at these decks. White. Low Shield, Clockwork Scholar. This may be my most unique deck out of all. Low Shield is a commander that not many people have built around. This deck is all about maintaining a wide board state and card advantage. Retrofitter Foundry fits nice with this strategy, and Tempered Steel is a great finisher. It's not uncommon that I have to discard to hand size in a game, which in mono white is an amazing feeling. I love that this deck is very open-ended, and I can upgrade with almost every set. I've discussed this deck on the channel, so I will link that video below. Blue. Cosima, God of the Voyage. One of my lower powered decks, Cosima is all about vehicles. Cards like Heart of Kirin, the Weatherlight, and Sky Sovereign Console Flagship play big roles in this deck and allow me to tap creatures like Arbiter of the Ideal to gain great amounts of value. As I said, it's not the most powerful deck in my collection, but it has some nice synergy. Black. Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. This deck is yet another one I have based around value. This deck lets me use life as a resource to cast spells and then gain that life back with a big Crick. Font of Agonies is a great removal spell in the deck that synergizes with the commander, and who doesn't love finishing a turn with a Tendrils of Agony? One of my favorite things about this deck is that even when tapped out, it can still have ways to respond, which makes our opponents second guess themselves. Victim of Night is a really playable card in this deck. With every new set, I feel like this deck grows stronger. Red. Krenko, Mob Boss. Krenko is an incredibly popular commander, and for a good reason. The number of tokens that can enter the battlefield in one turn is astounding, especially with a card like Thousand Year Elixir in play or Battle Mage's Bracers. This deck actually used to be a Purpose God of the Forge deck, but since I already had cards like Goblin Rabblemaster, I switched over and do not regret it. From mana rocks like Heraldic Banner to planeswalkers like Zerial Archduke of Avernus. This deck has so many ways to pose a threat. Plus, who doesn't love goblins? Green. Ghalta, Primal Hunger. Ghalta is another combat-focused deck that tries to ramp out and stomp with Ghalta as fast as possible. Cards like Steel Leaf Champion with higher power let Ghalta hit the battlefield early, and then the fun starts. Ulvenwald Tracker can take creatures out, while cards like Garruk Primal Hunter can refresh our hand, and Overwhelming Stampede wins the game almost every time it's played. Ghalta is a very powerful version of the classic mono-green stompy theme. Colorless, Kozilek, the Great Distortion. Kozilek is actually one of the most expensive cards I have ever bought, and it's a bit pricey, but a very fun commander. The entire deck is about ramping as fast as possible to resolve Kozilek and discard cards to counter spells and stifle the board. Forsaken Monument is an incredible card in this deck and helps us pop out big Eldrazi like It That Betrays. But one of my favorite parts of this deck are the special lands I get to play, like Tron lands, Bonder's Enclave, and one of my personal favorite pet cards, Sheltered Valley. Overall, this deck is really fun to play just because of the big mana spells I get to play. Azorius. Kengi, Area Keeper. This is my infamous bird tribal deck that I've actually done a deck tech on before. I've updated the deck since, but the deck revolves around tribal cards for birds like Aven Brigadier. There are a lot of unique cards in this deck like Commander Isha and even ramp spells that synergize well. Cartographer's Hawk has done a lot of good in the deck, for example, but if you want an in-depth breakdown of this deck, you can click that little box in the corner, or the link in the description if you want to watch that after this video is over. Azorius. Millicent, Restless Revenant. This is an upgraded version of the Innistrad Blue-White Spirit Precon deck. Commander cards like Spectral Arcanist lend a slew of powerful tribal abilities, while cards like Curiosity Crafter really maximize the number of tokens that the deck produces. By no means is this the most powerful deck I own, but it certainly succeeds in doing things every time I play it. Kairi, the Swirling Sky, also happens to be a spirit, which I think is really cool. Dimir. Phaenax, God of Deception. Phaenax is one of the better mill commanders that has ever been printed. The ability for all of your creatures to tap at instant speed to mill a player is absolutely incredible. Consuming Aberration is an all-star in this deck that, even though it could use some Mind Flayer's upgrades, still packs a punch. Phanex has the great ability to make Night Howler and a bunch of walls amazing cards, but I'll leave you with one last card, Intruder Alarm. This card is so good in this deck. Dimir, Skeleton Ship. Skeleton Ship is one of my newer decks. It's a really fun reserve list card that I wanted to build a deck around. Although on the surface, it's an unimpressive -1/-1 counter dealer, the deck can actually use cards like Willbreaker, which was a turning point in my research that emboldened me to make this deck. Cards like Dismiss into Dream certainly did not hurt my decision-making process. The deck is a little clunky, but if it gets going with some untappers and a nest of scarabs, it can do some damage. Rakdos. Rakdos, Lord of Riots. This Demon Tribal deck, my first $200 plus deck, was initially headed by Rakdos the Showstopper. It's complete in its unique box, which I made in my engineering class. And similarly to that box, the deck at first was a little bit clunky, which caused me to change the commander. Liliana's Contract is my hopeful win condition, but often the deck doesn't even need to rely on that to win. Turns out big demons like Lord of the Void don't need synergy to be amazing, just ramp them the chance to not die. Who would have thought? Gruul, Halar the Firefletcher. This deck is my most controversial to myself. I always feel like the deck is terrible until I play it. Once Forgotten Ancient gets a chance to shine, an Overload turns into 10 damage to each opponent, which makes it really hard for me to condone taking this deck apart. So as much as I hate to admit it, this deck can actually be really good. Of course, Hydra's Growth and cards similar to that excel in this deck. Alright, I'm ready to talk about the next deck. Selesnya, Tristani, Selesnya's Voice. This deck is a classic token life gain deck. Some cards like Trudge Guard manage to bring the themes together quite nicely. Making more creatures gains us more life, and gaining more life means that attacking poses less and less of a threat to us. Tristani's ability means that Sarah Avatar doubles our life total, and that Blossoming Bog Beast is almost Craterhoof Behemoth good when it attacks. That's a big win though. This creature does not have haste. Otherwise, this is actually the first deck I ever teched on the channel. You can check it out in the description below, but warning, that is a cringy video for me to watch. Selesnya, Nazan, Revered Bladesmith. This is the upgraded version of the Commander 2017 Feline Ferocity Commander deck, with some new equipment added and more of a focus around equipment rather than cats. I actually play Kahira the Orphan Guard as a companion in this deck, making it the only one of my commander decks with a companion. I found that Vigilance is a really valuable ability in a deck that wants to go tall with equipment. The original deck already came with all-stars like Bloodforged Battleaxe and Miri Weatherlight Duelist, so it's sufficient to say that the deck throws around some powerful spells. Sigarda's Aid is an amazing upgrade to the deck, so is Lion Sash, because it's a cat, equipment, and graveyard hate all in one creature. Orzhov, Teysa Karlov. Teysa Karlov is all about death triggers, so if it dies, we play it. Revel in Riches is one of these cards that doubles as an alternate win condition. We get draw triggers in cards like Grim Haruspex, we get mana in cards like Pawn of Ulamog, and this deck winds up being able to do a lot of different things. The biggest things that this deck needs to function, though, are sack outlets, which we get in Ashnod's Altar and other cards like Viscera Seer. This is a pretty straightforward deck to play, but it can pack some serious power. Once you get a card like Skullclamp on the battlefield, it's pretty hard to lose when you're drawing 4 cards so frequently. Is it Malik? Is it Paragon? This is a Spellslinger deck with a bit of a pricey commander mana-wise. Malik Is It Paragon costs 6, but boy can it be abused. Brainstorm or similar top deck manipulation cards like Mystical Tutor are really great here. This deck normally storms off with mana spells like High Tide or Seething Song, and then uses all of the manipulation to play extra turn spells like Temporal Trespass or Beacon of Tomorrows. All the while, of course, a creature like Talrand Sky Summoner is there to take advantage of the situation. This deck is actually really volatile once Malik gets out, but it is prone to succumbing to removal, so you have to make sure you either have a counterspell or a Swiftfoot Boots Up. Bulgari, Lathril, Blade of Elves. This deck is the classic Elf Tribal Commander deck. It's pretty simple. I upgraded the precon to improve it a little bit more, and here we are. Elvish Archdruid and Circle of Dreams Druid are 2 of my favorite elven mana dorks. They allow us to go really, really wide very fast. Pact of the Serpent helps to take care of card draw, and this is a very potent deck that's not all too complicated. Bulgari, Belby, Corrupted Observer. Belby Corrupted Observer couples life-draining effects with big creature spells that can win us the game. The idea is that we will always be getting more mana from our commander more consistently than our opponents, and thus we should win. Sanctum of Stone Fangs is an all-star in this deck, draining our opponents every single turn. If we don't have that, we can still attack with something like a Vicious Conquistador and then play something like a God Pharaoh statue or an Artisan of Kozilek. This deck is a little dangerous because of the mana we give our opponents, but more often than not, it works beautifully in our favor. Boros, Wyleth, Soul of Steel. Like many of my decks, this is an upgraded precon deck. Since Boros struggles with card draw, Wyleth was really attractive to me. Hammer of Nazan is amazing in this deck. It almost ramps us if you think about it. Once this deck starts to get going, it's really difficult to stop it. Powerful artifacts like Sunforger and Argentum Armor make this deck fun to play, it draws us cards, and it's another white deck where we need to discard the hand size. Simic, Tatiova, Penthic Druid. Tatiova is one of my best commander decks. The great part about this deck is that the synergies are based off of lands. With so many decks, board wipes really hurt, but not Tatiova. After you play Traverse the Outlands, those lands stay on the battlefield, they're not going anywhere. Glacial Chasm's a land in this deck that is the perfect way to stall out until Laboratory Maniac or Jace, Wielder of Secrets, follow up a Leveler or Enter the Infinite to win the game for us. In case you couldn't tell, this is one of my favorite decks I own. I get to play so many cards I love, like Gaia's Touch, and I get to play so many cool versions of cards. Every time I play this deck, it always has people attacking me, and for good reason. The win percentage on this deck is probably best of any deck I own. Esper, Verena the Queen. This is my zombie tribal deck, which is made up of a bunch of cards I got from my Zendikar random buy, which is linked below, like Undead Warchief. This is a really simple deck to build and play. Zombies and Madness cards. Rooftop Storm, Crypt Breaker, and Bone Miser are on my list of amazing cards this deck uses, and I could go on and on. It's another one of my favorite decks, and the beautiful Zendikar full arts in here definitely don't hurt. Grixis, Nakusar the Mind Racer. Nakusar is about making everyone draw cards and then my opponents suffer. Windfall is an awesome way to do this, and cards like Fate Unraveler or Charetic Parasite really make this deck tick and our opponents die faster. Nakusar is known for being a very annoying commander to play against, and this becomes something of a removal magnet. If it doesn't, games can get out of hand very quickly, especially with a card like Waste Nut. Grixis, Evelyn the Covetous. My second newest commander deck is Evelyn. This is a vampire tribal build inspired by Lord Xander. I won't even bother to lie about that. That single card was convincing enough for me to make this deck. Champion of Dusk certainly doesn't hurt either, and I make sure to play enough blue vampires and cards to make this deck warrant playing blue, because I feel like that's the one question everyone gives me. A blue vampire deck? So, Jaleva, this one's for you. Grixis, Marisol Pretender. Okay, I'm a bit of a Grixis fan. But this deck also sort of made itself. It's sort of straightforward, just play cards with crazy activated abilities. That means Naveen Rule's Disc, Arcanus the Omnipotent, and Aetherling, to name a few. Once we flicker him a few times and he has a bunch of abilities, I can play a Spark Double to make a copy of my commander. Also, this deck is a great location for my Staff of Domination, and somehow manages to make Minion of Leshrac commander playable. Junt Prash, Sky Raider of Care. Unfortunately, this deck is not a CEDH tier combo deck. Instead, it's a fun and frantic aristocrat deck since our commander does have a free sack trigger built in. The Meat Hook Massacre, Pitiless Plunderer, and Poison Tip Archer are just some of the powerful effects that can get even crazier when you consider that we get 6 tokens from just casting our commander the first time, and that 21 commander damage kills someone. Sacrificing a creature like a Sprouting Thrynax can maximize our damage even further. Naya, Max the Daredevil, and Mike Dungeon Master. Okay, this is probably my actually most controversial deck because it does use Secret Lair cards, which people are split on, but I enjoy the deck and I enjoy the cards. The entire point of this deck is to have creatures die and then bring them back. Once we cast our second spell each turn, our commander Mike untaps thanks to our other commander Max, and we get to do it all over again. There is actually an infinite combo in this deck. If we have Devoted Druid out and Makeshift Munitions, then all we need to go infinite is a Great Oak Guardian. We can pay 1 mana to sacrifice the Great Oak Guardian, and then use 2 from the Devoted Druid to activate our commander and bring back the Guardian to the battlefield. And then boom, Devoted Druid is untapped with 3 toughness, and we can repeat infinitely. Now it's time for Bant, which I also love, so hang on folks. Bant. Chulane, Teller of Tales. Chulane is known as one of the premier commanders in the format, and for good reason. Every time we play a creature, Chulane draws us a card, and we get a land from our hand onto the battlefield. This deck wants to ramp out and then win the game with big creatures like Vorinclex and Jin-Gitaxias. If it's a cool creature with a cool effect, then we play it in this deck. That means Reclamation Sage, Beast Whisperer, and of course Thassa's Oracle, just to name a few. Mana doublers like Zendikar Resurgent and Mirari's Wake only further the havoc this deck wreaks. Side note, but get your Tireless Provisioners while you can, that card is insanely good. Phant. Durevi, Imperial Tactician. Another of the most powerful commanders ever printed, Durevi circumvents commander tax and the untap abilities that it provides allow stacks to take place and mana ramp to exist in large quantities. Although, since I'm a little bit nice, I don't lean into the stacks portion too much. This deck has it all: insane synergy, interaction out the wazoo, an infinite combo, signed cards, and of course, a little sprinkling of stacks. Not as much as my next deck, but I do run Aven Mind Sensor and Stoic Angel. Stoic Angel obviously synergizes more in this deck. This deck is really fun and complicated, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll leave it here. If you want a full deck tech though, make sure to comment below. Bant. Estrid the Masked. Bant is incredibly powerful in Commander. This is yet another of my best decks. Estrid is a card draw queen, mana ramp goddess, and a combo enabler with the Chain Veil. And it's a stacks and pillow fort commander. Protection synergies. Dawn's Reflection that becomes so much more potent when it untaps at least once every turn, and Winter Orb being incredibly stifling in this deck for only our opponents. We get to untap our lands as long as they are enchanted, which they are. The only downside is that the deck doesn't get the most play because people hate to play against it. Abzan, Nethroi, Apex of Death. This is Confession Time, the deck I play the least. Mutate is just a weird ability, but this deck is strong enough that it warrants some oddities. There are certainly some good cards like Dirgebat in the deck. The deck is almost a zero-power tribal deck with cards like Eidolon of Countless Battles and Newsgraph Mob. Add in a few sack outlets, cycle cards like Street Wraith, self-mill a little bit, and we have a pretty potent deck. Sultai, Sadisi Brood Tyrant. Speaking of self-mill, this Sadisi deck is purely a self-mill deck. One of my earlier commander builds, it's held up very well. Splendid Reclamation, Sir Conrad, Living Death, and Thassa's Oracle are clear all-stars in this deck. I actually got a great deal on a Hermit Druid back in the day, so that's a card I play in here too, and it is one of the best pieces in this deck at milling ourselves out. The deck in general is really good at milling itself out, and in the meantime protecting itself via 2/2 zombies before I can resolve a Jace, Thassa's Oracle, or Laboratory Maniac to win the game. It's a really fun deck to play, and I always appreciate a commander with an ETB. Mardu, Ishin, 2 heavens as 1. This is my newest deck, and thus probably needs the most work, but right off the starting blocks, it's done a lot of work. It's been really good. Aurelia the War Leader can give us extra combats, Parhelion can give us a lot of angels, and what I love about the deck is that it makes cards I never thought I'd play in Commander really good. Audacious Thief becomes a great card draw source, and Coastline Marauders becomes one heck of an attacker. The synergy in this deck is awesome to watch. You can declare attackers and then spend the next 90 seconds just resolving your attack triggers. Teamer, Paco and Halden. Paco and Halden are the Teamer version of Evelyn, stealing everything they can from our opponents. Herald of Secret Streams is actually an all-star in the deck and makes our big ol' commander unblockable. When it does damage, Professional Facebreaker can make us treasures that we can just use to cast our opponent's spells. That's basically the game plan in this deck. Ramp, and then play our opponent's things. White, blue, black, red. Breya, Ethereum Shaper. Breya is the classic 4-color artifact commander. It can utilize a lot of artifact synergies across 4 out of the 5 colors. We're not confined to the more narrow synergies. We get a lot of cards to work with. We can play Joyra Weatherlight Captain to draw us cards every time we play an artifact, and also play Bronze Guardian. It protects our board and gets larger whenever we play an artifact. Reckless Fireweaver does damage when an artifact enters. It has a lot of synergy, and it's even better when Conjurer's Closet is on the field. Breya is a classic artifact commander, and for really good reason. Blue, black, red, green. Yiddris, the Maelstrom wielder. This deck is all about cascading, getting as much value as I can from it. I utilize cards like Averna, the Chaos Bloom to get extra lands, and Inevitable Betrayal works together with Mox Hammer to make sure I always have something to cascade into. The normal way this deck wins is either incredible value cards like Cloud of Fairies, or one of the best cards I own, Great Whale, or just resolving Gutter Snipe and letting it do its thing. Witherbloom Apprentice is another really strong card in this deck. Overall, the deck, like many others I own, is built on getting as much value as possible, and once Yiddris does damage, especially if it's given double strike with the Lizard Blades, it is pretty hard to stop. White, black, red, green. Ikra Shadiki and Bruce Tarl. This partner deck is a 4-color life gain deck. Orzhov is known for Cabal, Console of Allocation type life gain decks, and Bulgari is known for its Willow Dusk-esque life gain in its own right. So I figured, why not combine the two and throw in a little sprinkle of red? That way I could play some Punishers knowing that I would have more life than my opponents, such as Price of Progress, as well as Dictate of the Twin Gods. By virtue of me having more life, those benefit the life gain deck. Overall, this deck, once it gets its colors right, still working on the land base a little bit, is a really fun take on a life gain deck that is focused in combat but can absolutely work without that aspect. White, blue, red, green. This is one of my more unique decks. This deck is actually themed around creatures with power 2 or less. Specifically, combat triggers from those creatures, like Trigon Predator. It also uses cards like Combat Calligrapher to try and facilitate combat to our opponents instead of us. Professional Facebreaker helps us ramp, and durevi Imperial Tactician does the same by letting us untap things or tap things down. Mirror Entity is the type of card that's going to win us a game. As long as people can't declare blockers, we can just activate it after blockers are declared to kill people. This deck is weird, but once again it has a lot of synergy, and as you can probably tell, that's a through line for all my decks. I love decks with synergy. Green, white, blue, black. Big surprise, this is a +1/+1 counter deck in the colors of Atraxa. We just play all of the +1 tribal effects we can. Corpse Stack Menace is quite the card, and as is the case in a whole bunch of my synergistic decks, the synergy transcends just game finishers. Even a Ramp Incubation Druid is a prime example of what I mean. In card draw we have Fathom Mage, in removal we have Walking Ballista. This deck was actually what my role of the whole clay deck has morphed into, and I'm very happy that it did. 5-color. Sisay, Weatherlight Captain. I couldn't have made this many decks and not included a Super Friends deck. This deck wants to go off with Gigantha, who can tap to activate Sisay's ability. Once we have Gigantha, we can get Ral Zarek to untap Gigantha, and Kiora, Master of the Depths, Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, Teferi, Temporal Archmage, and then Oath of Teferi and do it all again. Even if Gigantha dies, we still have backup plans, but if she doesn't... The first Sliver. I keep talking about synergy. That's the one word I've used over and over and over again, so it's no surprise that Slivers are undeniably one of my favorite decks. They are the pinnacle of synergy. We can cascade down a staircase of Slivers into a great 0-mana spell like a Profane Tutor. This deck is explosive, powerful, and targeted. I'm the archenemy as soon as this commander hits the command zone. From ramp like Manoweth Sliver to removal like Constricting Sliver, Slivers really have the entire package. I regard this tribe as Magic's best, and for good reason. 5-color, General Tazri. This is an ally tribal deck known for General Tazri's ability to search up the allies we want. Specifically, let's search up a Turntimber Ranger. With Arcane Adaptation, the wolves are wolf allies, so they trigger Turntimber Ranger again. Boom, Infinite enters the battlefield triggers. The deck is built around that combo and supported by a bit of flicker synergies like Brago, King Eternal, and actually gate synergies around Baldur's Gate. This deck has become sort of a petri dish of synergy and different themes, and I'm happy with the direction it's going. Whew, that is all of my decks. I know that was really long, but thank you so much for watching. If you want to know more about any of these, leave a comment, and I may even deck tech some of them. If you made it this far, I would really appreciate you spending the extra few seconds to press that subscribe button. It means a lot to me. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.